Good morning, everyone. This is a new podcast. It is the Inspire podcast, and it's going to be me and obviously the famous JJ the CPA. This is our first episode. We're going to talk about why we're doing the podcast, what it means, and what we hope to achieve. JJ, yeah.
Anshul, I'm honored to be on this quest with you. And our quest is basically this to inspire that next generation to become a CPA. And we know that there are a lot of options for young folks or those that are considering a career in accounting. We know that CPA isn't the end all be all, but at the end of the day, my family has been in the CPA tradition for 71 years. My grandfather became a CPA in 1954 in Nebraska, USA, and then continued that tradition in 1956 and practiced in California until he passed. And I am the third generation. My son has joined my CPA practice and is on his way to be the fourth generation. So it's near and dear to my heart in terms of quote unquote saving the CPA profession for my family. And that's just, we want to keep it relevant. Anshul, when you and we met about a year ago, we had a great time. We met in person when we were in New York City, and I think we met for somewhere around 8 hours
Yeah.
straight.
We-
And we're both very passionate about it. And, from your perspective, and we're going to kind of talk a little bit about, of course, Inspire. And of course, we have plans in the works to have a conference, and we plan to kind of polarize this from the standpoint of having something in India as well as in the US, kind of pulling these things together. But why are you interested in being a part of this quest of ensuring the CPA profession continues to be strong? Right now, it's looking grim in terms of the numbers as we get further down the road.
My motivation is slightly more global. I'm not an accountant. No one in my family has been an accountant, but we are all entrepreneurs. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. And I've been doing this global expansion thing for a while, like 13, 14 years. I've helped quite a few companies expand globally. 3 years back, I stumbled upon an opportunity in accounting where, as you described it, there aren't enough accountants. People are looking to hire globally. And what I saw was there was so much resistance. There is so much misinformation out there where you say the word offshoring and it's almost a stigma, right? I say the word offshoring and it puts people off, some people off. And for me, I want to change that. I don't think the CPA profession going global is a bad thing. I think it is something we need to celebrate, right? We talked about it in New York, right? You were like, well, we have these group of people like who are like, oh, you're having a problem in the US? I'll help. Oh, you want me to take the EA exam or become a CPA? I'll do it. You want me to train in a different culture? I'll do it. So when you have a group of people, and it's not just India, I'm talking globally, when you have such hardworking people who are looking to help, I think that needs to be celebrated. So for me personally, I don't want anyone to be afraid of offshoring. I don't want anyone to not do offshoring because it doesn't feel right. If it's not a good fit for your firm, your strategy, it makes sense. But I mean, I feel we need to be friends. Then, I mean, you said it, right? I've used that phrase so many times. Global CPAs are your collaborators. They're not your competitors. So that's the point I want to bring across. And when we connected, it was just like you wanted to do that, I wanted to do that. So I was like, all right, let's make it happen, right? So that's sort of what's in it for me.
Yeah. And, a part of the Inspire is I had thought about this last year and putting together a conference of CPAs with the mindset of those that are in different age groups in the CPA profession, from maybe being in college to new CPAs to long time. Similar to me, I've been in this tradition personally for 33 years. I've had my own CPA practice for 27. This is all I've done in terms of using my three letters, the CPA, to care for my family and make a living, preparing taxes and helping clients save on taxes. And so I feel very passionate about what I'm doing. And really, when I look at the next 10 to 15 years, just due to retirement, at least in the US, we're going to be losing what's estimated to be 75% or so of CPAs currently in practice. And I'm part of that tradition. I'm 53 years old. And when we look at the numbers, we have maybe around 18,000 new CPAs coming into existence each year. And so if you start rolling these numbers ahead, we're going to have a massive shortage. We're probably really only going to make up maybe half of the CPAs that we're going to lose. And why does this matter? Well, that CPA tradition has been around a long time. It does stand for something that most designations don't stand for in terms of the tradition and the history. Now, I get it. We're not here to argue about is the CPA designation better than any other designation. But what I am saying is that for those that would enjoy having this designation, the certified public accountant, the CPA, for me, when my son is my age, our family then will be celebrating 100 years in this profession. And I don't want my son looking around and really having the CPA be somewhat irrelevant and very unknown, so to speak. I think it'd just be a tragedy. And so for me, when we say not competitors, but collaborators. We know that to you, what you'd said, there's a lot of opinions on this, on the CPA, that designation, the US CPA now being something that's available in other countries. And I know we're going to get into it, but when you were talking about the stigmatism and misinformation, I think that what we want our whole podcast to be about is to provide an opportunity in the US to be in a position to listen and to understand why. So I don't think this podcast is going to be driven by clicks and numbers and purposely controversial. I think there are those on social media that probably don't really care, and or it's something that they're jumping on the bandwagon. And at least right now, it seems that there's more negativity that people are jumping on the bandwagon. But I'll just say this, the American Institute of CPAs, the mothership, of the CPA profession, the designation, the protector of it, the expander of it, they are the ones that have led this way, led us in
Yeah.
this direction of being global. Anshul, I know we're going to be having some guests, and in episode 2, we'll be talking about having some of our guests on, but really from the unique perspective of, share a little bit about, I know you talked about why you're a part of this, but you are coming from a background that this profession is moving towards. And in terms of, just where you grew up and the connections that you have, share a little bit about that, since I've shared a little bit about my history.
So I'll talk a bit about India and why India is leading the charge when it comes to like non-US CPAs. When I talk to students here, when I talk to people in the industry who are accountants, or as you said, there's negativity, right? There's people are like, there's gloom, and they're like, I don't know what's going to happen with AI and offshoring and everything changing. But when you go to India and when we take that trip, you'll see that there's that energy around this US CPA profession in India. People are running towards it. I'm actually going to put out some numbers later this month where I believe that the number of CPAs in India is going to equal, or if not exceed, the number of US CPAs in the US. There's 800,000 people taking the accounting exam, the Indian equivalent of accounting exam in India, and only about 40,000 become accountants, like get that designation. That's 750,000 people who have had their dreams of becoming an accountant shattered. Now, that group, some of them are retaking the exam because, I mean, it's not, you don't get it on the first try, right? But a lot of them are now running towards the US CPA profession. From what I've heard, the pass rates for the US CPA are a lot higher than the Indian CA exam, right? And then you're making more money because US firms generally pay more than Indian firms, right? So it's easier, there's more money, and it's new, it's shiny. There's entrepreneurial opportunities towards the end of it. So people are just running towards becoming US CPAs. I think there's already about 11,000 CPAs in India, and that's the exam in India went live in 2021.
Correct.
And that's despite of lockdowns and everything, we already have 11,000 CPAs. Now, India has 1.5 billion people, billions of people graduating. Accounting is one of the top career choices. Like you put all of that together, and you have this big talent pool that's extremely motivated, extremely entrepreneurial, and they're not looking at AI as a problem. They're looking at AI as it's going to help me become a better accountant. It's going to help me, serve my American clients better. They're not looking at offshoring as a problem. Like obviously they're offshore, but they're looking at it as, all right, I don't want to replace anyone. I want to complement whatever they're doing. How do I do that in the best way? And you take all of that energy, all of that demographic shift that's happening in India, top notch education institutions. I mean, I think India is going to be the place for American firms to go and find talent. Yes, there's Philippines, there's Argentina, but like India is going to be the behemoth simply because the population, the education, and that's the drive of people. Like somebody told me they traveled to India and they said that the drive that they see in India and Indians right now is similar to the drive we saw in Americans after World War II. So, I mean, that's a bit of why I believe India is going to play a bigger and bigger role in like global accounting, not just US, UK, Australia, Canada.
Yeah, and I really feel as though the biggest purpose of our podcast Inspire is to inspire US CPAs to be excited about the new opportunities that the AI CPA is providing so that our profession will survive. And future episodes, we'll be talking about some of the big issues that people are having related to this. And I feel as though we will have a positive sentiment. I know of other podcasts that are calling out people, and I feel like very purposely being controversial and finger pointing. And even when I read some of them, I dare say, even though it may be that the person is feeling an intention of American pride, it feels though more by the language that's being selected and the sentiment, at least that I'm reading between the lines, that it is discriminatory. And I know that we would never want to be discriminatory, quote unquote, when we're talking about from Americans inside of America, inside the US. But I find it problematic when someone is being discriminatory when we're now talking about this designation on a global standpoint. And I feel like it's just because of what we said in the beginning. There's not an understanding. They've not been put in a position maybe to consider the information that's more of a reality. And anytime there is change or we feel that there is a threat to anything that we do, our first natural, probably human reaction is to be defensive and maybe
Yep.
protective. And so, of course, that sentiment may not come across in a positive way. And so the reason I'm even saying that is that we don't plan to bring on those type of guests. We don't plan to be doing those type of tactics, which means that we'll have a longer, I think, trek for our podcast to be heard and to gain interest. Because I do think, though, over time, we're going to see it come full circle and we're going to see people basically embrace this. And so as we wrap up episode 1, I would just say this. When my grandfather told me about becoming a CPA, one of the things that he said is, you will always want to protect your fellow CPA. And as quote unquote a competitor with other CPAs here locally, meaning I'm doing tax returns, other people are doing tax returns, I have a business, other CPAs have a business. And my grandfather really reiterated that we have to look out for one another. We have to protect one another. And so he said, don't ever find yourself bad mouthing another CPA, whether they deserve it or not, but you need to protect the profession as a whole. And what he said was that requires being open to other people in the profession doing things differently. Maybe it's how they go about their practice or how they go about their advice. Now, at the time, there was not a global discussion going on about the CPA. But really, what I took to heart that I think applies here for somebody that was the first generation in our family as a CPA is that as the CPA, we need to be inclusive, we need to be accepting, we need to protect. And I don't think that there's ever then room for basically inching somebody out or negatively disallowing for somebody to be a part of this wonderful tradition of being a CPA.
I agree. And I'll just say one thing before we close off the first episode. I agree with you. I think there's a lot of people who are saying things just to get attention. But the way I look at our podcast is I want this to be about education. We want to educate people on what it is to work with global CPAs. Like, what are some benefits? What are some risks, right? What are some things that'll do work well? What are some things that won't work well? So that's all we want to do. Like, when I think of like what questions I want to ask you, what things we want to talk about, what guests we want to bring, I only think of education. Let's educate people. And yeah, as you said, it's going to be a bigger, longer trek when you are educating. But I'm okay with that, right? So I'm completely okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's been said many times, to understand, you must first put yourself in a position of listening. And so, what we want to do with guests is listen. And part of that education is seeing what somebody else says about this. But different from anything I think you and I have seen is that we're going to be bringing those that are in these other countries to America, in part maybe a part of the conference that we're doing. You and I are going to India. So we're going to see things firsthand. We're going to be talking to people firsthand. And that is a way to not only educate, but to show what it is that's going on outside of the borders. Because I think a lot of that, all the discussions that we're seeing in the articles and the podcast, is a bunch of Americans talking with a bunch of Americans based on what, quote unquote, their opinions are, versus now actually extending a hand and seeing, well, what else is out there, and what is it that we're really trying to accomplish here, and what is their motive, if you will. For us, we need to understand this entire issue at hand. And I think that with the Inspire podcast, that's what we'll be doing. That is our end goal here.
Completely agreed. Well, we'll wrap this one up. Thank you for tuning in. We'll drop an episode every few days until our big conference. We're working towards that. But thank you for tuning in. And JJ, always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. And be sure to check out our future podcasts.